What's up? This is Seth Mosley, and you're with us on the Made It in Music podcast. Hope y'all are hanging in there okay. It's a crazy world right now if you're listening to it, and we are still in the coronavirus situation, which I'm anticipating will be for a little while now. This episode is going to be very timely for you, and we have with us on the show today John Butler, who is a man with inside knowledge about how streaming is going to evolve and play out over the next couple of years. How does he have that? Well, because he was on the inside of Spotify. He was a curator and is just going to blow your minds with tons of knowledge about how you can dominate in the streaming world, which is the world we live in now. So whether it's Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon, Pandora, that's what we're talking about today. But before we jump in, just a quick little Academy quick tip highlight. Make sure that you are subscribed to this podcast. Subscribing is what podcast players look at the most for recommending top podcasts, so it really helps us out. And subscribing makes sure that all the new episodes are automatically on your device whenever you're ready to listen. Your music education is one of the most important things that you can work on in the music industry. So if you're new to the music industry, learning the ins and outs of how it works, it's one of the best things you can do to grow. And the pros also know how important it always is to be learning, to stay on top of the latest industry trends. Tons of music biz professionals, record labels, managers, publishers, and musicians all listen to this podcast too. So if you're not yet subscribed, do yourself a favor, take just a few seconds to fix that on your favorite podcasting tool right now. So without further ado, John Butler, welcome to the Made It Music podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me this morning. I appreciate the time. And I don't know if you have a lot of time, but sort of this weird place of feeling like you do have a lot of time, but the days are going by really quickly.
They are. Well, and I appreciate your time, man. I know it's crazy. You're a man in demand as far as, this new world that we're living in. With streaming, and you bring a lot of expertise to that. So before we jump into all that, I'd love to just hear a little bit of your backstory. What was the moment that music first connected with you and you knew that it was going to be what you did professionally?
I wanted to be a baseball player when I was a kid. So I was very much interested in the art of batting. I remember reading this great book by Charlie Lau, who coached George Brett of the Kansas City Royals on his exceptional 1980 year where he hit like 390 for the year. It was ridiculous. And sort of like I wanted to do that, but the baseball was just everything. So I hadn't thought about music at all. And I guess when you're 12, 13 and you start to get a little taller, maybe you develop a little quicker, or some don't. And we used to have these kids, like 13 years old, they were throwing 80 miles an hour. And I was like, I barely could throw a curveball and barely hit 60. So I was like, but I'd always been fascinated about music and but never played an instrument. So I picked up a guitar, got a guitar, and got into that pretty quickly. And by at least maybe 2 years into it, I was pretty proficient. And before the age of being able to look at YouTube videos, man, I wish I had some of that stuff growing up. But I was copying licks from records and tapes and rewinding and starting again. So decided actually to go to school for that and was able to go to a great school called William Patterson University in Wayne, New Jersey, a great jazz program there. They also have a music business program. So I was fascinated about sort of the ins and outs of why things work and who did what on the back of record album covers and, what people's lives were like in music. So the business part was always interesting to me, but it wasn't clear how people why people did what they did or what it is that they did. So I just was had a deep passion about learning when it came to that stuff. So went there and got a degree in music and music management, worked at a radio station there at college and was able to pick music. So I was working on the air, had a DJ show, 6 to 10 in the morning. As a college student, you can imagine that was Not normal.
That's an early morning.
That's an early morning. 3 days, not 5 days a week, 3 days a week. So Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Think about Thursdays in college, right? And so I was there at 6 a.m. up, doing a morning show on a college radio station. So
wow,
that's how I got into the music business. So I went right from there to a gig in college radio promotion. So I think I was 21, something like that. Maybe. I don't think I was even 21 yet.
Yeah, and I think when we first met, you were in radio promotions, and so how long did you do that for? I mean, I know that was a big chunk of your career was in radio promo.
Yeah, that is never going to go away. I mean, that's part of the foundational exposure of music. So it's like the old new tech, basically. So I did record promotion for 27 years.
Wow.
Yeah. It's like calling radio, thinking about it, sleeping about it.
Yeah.
And knowing how that worked. And that definitely served me pretty well. And from understanding, the foundations of like exposing music and how to work with people and learning about the realities of how people consume music. So it was a really valuable background. I wish a lot more of my, editorial friends had that sort of radio promotion or radio background, but that's a trend that actually is kind of happening right now at DSPs. There's actually more radio people and people that are coming from traditional media into these services as they mature. So.
Well, tell us about that part of your journey, because you've got some very inside experience having been one of the leaders of the Spotify Nashville office. Can you tell us about that part of your journey?
Yeah, so after doing radio promotion for a good amount of time, the reason kind of why I got interested in streaming as a function of why it was important is because I was sort of dealing with needing to have as much data to really effectively work our records. And there was just a real lack of it, or a lack of leverage of audiences that we were building for records that we were working at radio on the label side. And there wasn't really any sort of apparatus to serve that to me to be able to go into a radio station and say, hey, look, we have an audience. Look, we have a sync placement in a TV show or film. Those things are really valuable in terms of the building blocks of being able to market a record thoroughly. And my hat had to change just because it was sort of like it didn't necessarily have that natively handed to me. It wasn't like, yeah, go work these radio stations. Here's all the information. Here's the great placement we have on TV. All that stuff had to be sort of developed by hand by our team, by our radio promotions team. So we had to kind of like become marketers in addition to radio station pluggers. And that's what made me fascinated about streaming data, because it was like knowing insights into radio's audience before radio did. And it just kind of, we were able to frame stories. You could take stories from the data where things were happening, where music was breaking out, be able to craft a story based on that back to radio. So I was like, that got me really excited about streaming and being able to use this technology. And that was 2013, maybe a little earlier. And I was really, I can tell you a pivotal moment that was influential at South by Southwest. There was a woman named Rachel Whitney who was working for Borman Management at the time. And she was heading a panel called A Million Streams Before Radio. And I'd never seen a panel like that, something that was advertised that way. So I may have been maybe one of a handful of promo people that went to that. I was fascinated about that. One of the things that I'd always kind of run into in my career working records at radio is that I always had to be pretty scrappy in terms of finding great opportunities, whether that was Sixpence None the Richer with Kiss Me and film placements and things like that. And I was a very small team working those things, without any right to be at the big kids table. So it's constantly trying to find ways that data can help us with the big kids table. And there was this panel at South by that was saying, hey, you need to have 1 million, and sort of in a way, you need to have 1 million streams before you're even thinking about marketing the radio. You need to be able to show that a song has, has acceptance in an audience to show general media that it's worthy for the investment of time. And even from a label standpoint, where are you going to put your money and your resources to build a career? Is that the right song? Well, streaming became this great place to test sort of your A&R hypothesis. And again, sort of tying all the different jobs that are at labels together into this thing. It was A&R, it was marketing, it was sales, it was promotion. And streaming sort of became the end of that funnel in any discussion that I was having for like 3 or 4 years. I had the great fortune of having a friendship early on before streaming with a guy who sold his company to Spotify. And he was also passionate about free research, learning more about how to get to the audience directly with music. And social media has done that for us, and platforms, even MySpace back in the day, right? Did that. And as well organized as all that was, the audience has really had to kind of age and grow up and mature with it. So all these other services probably wouldn't have been successful at that time. But now, like, people are native to this. They've grown into this idea that, people are discovering music without a top-down, old media sort of establishment. But it's also exciting for old media as well to understand their audience even better. So somewhere it's about being agreeable to the old media and the new media. That really got me excited about the idea of going to streaming. And since I had some experience in Christian music and understood that music pretty well, although I'd been working on the pop side and country side and rock side, I was given an opportunity to come in as a genre lead, the last one for at Spotify. And that was in early 2017.
Well, I want to come back to that, but let's fast forward really quick to today. You are, and I love the way that you word this. You can give people streaming guidance counseling. Can you tell us what all does that entail when somebody works with you? What is it that you do as far as, strategy, pitching, data analysis, all of that stuff? Can you give us the 10,000 foot overview of all of that?
Yeah, sometimes it's 60,000 feet. It gets very heady, very intellectual, very quickly. And I try not to do that because music is about relationship.
Yeah.
So the data is cold and it tells you something, but inside that data are particular stories about people's behavior, their interest and proclivity to particular styles, how they group things, how they make their own playlists. And each of those things, an understanding of those things are really helpful to understanding an artist understanding themselves and how their music is going to react to people. And since there's so much transparency, because in particular Spotify is an open platform, and the other services are beginning to be more open. I mean, Pandora's stories are fantastic, where artists can record and then put a playlist together, so it's a mixture of podcast and music. It's fantastic. I mean, more of that, please. Having the ability for an artist who really loves talking about their music, that platform is fantastic. Context in music is great. Music podcasts are really interesting because a lot of them you can't play music on, right? So you're talking about music. I used to hear these quotes all the time, like talking about music is like watching paint dry on the wall, right? It's very difficult to get emotion when you're talking about music. You want to turn the podcast off and go listen to music, right? But more to the point of what you were mentioning is that streaming just became the central point of how an artist is communicating with a potential audience. And so I'm able to kind of go in and find answers for X. So when any artist that I'm working with has strengths and weaknesses. So we really emphasize the strengths. Are they more visual? Are they more lyrical? Or do they love music? Do they love curation? Do they have great taste in music? Well, those are valuable tools now that are transparent to an audience that it may not have been in a traditional label or a traditional working radio sort of situation, where you have to go through another tool or another funnel in order to promote what it is that you're doing without any context. Now there's so much context. It's actually trying to find Sherpas that are able to kind of curate, which is why the role of the curation at DSPs became so important. It's just so much music, and even now so. And now there's a reliance now between human curation and computer-generated curation about being able to provide you as a user the best music experience. But think about that. We are in an age where if you fire up whatever DSP you use, pretty much it's going to be a halfway decent experience, and that decent experience is actually going to get phenomenally better. But we're really talking about a user experience. We're not necessarily always talking about an artist. And so I fall in between the line of trying to make a great artist experience where they're getting the most out of streaming directly to an audience that really is looking for them and wants them. So I exist in that place. So the skills of promotion background, where I always had to find that out. What format are we going to? What are the starter stations that we need to get? What do we need to kind of show people that there's something happening? How do we, figure out what's going on from the road and who's speaking? So all of that now is still important because it feeds into an actual one-to-one relationship with a listener and a user of that particular artist's music. So I craft plans to be able to do that. You can kind of take a look at their data and kind of figure out where they need to go, what they need to emphasize, and then have tools to be able to kind of help them do that.
I love it. So obviously some of the streaming guidance counseling relates to pitching. And I know, just to focus on Spotify for a second, they're very big on their whole playlist submission tool. But, how does one go about getting on playlists? You could speak specifically to Spotify. You could talk about the other ones as well, too.
Yeah, well, the pitch tool is really valuable. I mean, that's a really good question. I don't know if, it'll be interesting to see whether or not you have comments or whether or not in your experiences or other people's experience, what their experience has been with the pitch tool. But the pitch tool was created so that the editorial team, as well as people in Spotify, could make sense and manage the ability to be able to hear and deal with all the music that was coming into the platform. And it's such a great thing. And it was a brilliant piece of technology. It's I've heard a lot of people describe it a lot of different ways, and I try to come up with sort of ways of describing it to people that initially when they weren't sure what it was, and even artists now are kind of dealing with this tool here. What is it like? So, the DMZ line in North Korea and South Korea, right? There's like, I guess, a building and there's a table in it and there's a line that's like split down the middle, right? And, North Koreans sit on one side and South Koreans sit on the other side, and you're pushing papers across the table. You can't go over there. And so you're trading information in between this room. And it's kind of like what the pitch tool is. It's not completely like it, but it's kind of like that, but you don't see anybody. So it's kind of like a veiled screen, and you're pushing information into the editorial team that the editorial team is seeing, and they're listening to the music and they're considering all of these things. And the feedback is whether or not you get a playlist or whether or not you don't, or whether or not something else is happening. But it's a tool. It's an effective tool for artists to be able to have a direct discussion in the pitch, in words, and with the music, where the two people are not physically together, but that information is being switched back and forth. So you're pitching in, you know what it is that you sort of put in your story about that song, where you're thinking you can go.
Yeah.
And the editorial team is taking that information and thinking about where it is, what you've said. And the feedback is playlisting or not playlisting, or come back or send another piece of music, or tell me more about the right kind of pitch. And there's a lot of information out there about what the right kind of pitch is. And there's a lot of debate, and editors are human beings. So what resonates to one person may not resonate to others. I can share what was effective for me in the pitch tool is when an artist was able to share specifically about why the music that they wrote would move people. And in Christian music, that made a lot of sense, because there's a sense of hope and grace and forgiveness and love. And so I didn't want to see stats. I wanted to see the artist's heart. And if that music and what they wrote made me feel something, chances are other people probably would resonate to it. And if the track wasn't great, I have the ability always to feedback, right? But it definitely sort of like, after time, you can kind of get into a rhythm of how people were using the tool effectively. And I think people have done a very good job at utilizing it. I know that it's a godsend. Can you imagine? It's hard to describe what life was like as an editor without that tool. It was kind of like getting spreadsheets sent to you from every label, the chance encounter that you had with an independent artist that was individually pitching you is all over the place. You get links here, things there. Is a very inefficient way to sort of organize what you were going to do week to week, in addition to what was already available and being pitched in the back end of the service. So it changed the game. It made it possible for editors, and I think everybody would agree with this. It made it possible, and still makes it possible, for editorial team as well as Spotify to hear and interact with as much new music as even humanly possible, as well as the computer and the algorithms to handle it too.
Yeah.
The other DSPs work differently, but they all have pitch tools, and they all are you're all trying to figure out time that they have to be able to listen to music and assess whether or not this works in here. The biggest thing that an artist can do is be a user. Sometimes taking the artist's hat off is really valuable, and becoming a music fan and going into Apple's incredible playlist properties and really spending time and seeing these great descriptions. If you haven't, the folks, the editors there, write these beautiful descriptions of what that playlist is all about. They just seems a lot of room for being able to provide context as to what that expectation and that experience is all about. I mentioned Pandora Stories before. Amazon's playlists are strong too. I mean, there's great curation out there. Even Deezer, if you haven't used Deezer, please get in there and play around with it. Understand what the properties and what the playlists concepts are about. I had to take a lot of time in my role to think conceptually about what each playlist was supposed to provide in terms of the user experience, with either algorithmic help or with just my mindset and the group and the editorial team deciding there's a content area that we need to focus on. This is what we're missing. This is a concept for a list. So I created 90 playlists when I was at Spotify, and a lot of them, almost all of them, are still active. And each of them has a particular idea and concept within the variety of different genres that I got to touch. It's really about adhering to those things. And then users and artists are able to make their own playlists and their own concepts of those things as well. And it's really important.
Yeah, that's so good. So is it safe to say that obviously the playlist submission tool in Spotify is a super great tool to make sure you're getting in front of those human curators, because it is human curated. You mentioned that the other services have kind of their own versions of that as well. Is it safe to say that, somebody like you who is maybe an independent consultant in this area, like if the playlist tool is a line and everything is funneling through that, it's nice and organized. Is it safe to say that hiring or working with somebody like you is a little bit of a supplement to that, or a backdoor in to the actual people that are doing it?
I would say that I think an understanding of utilizing the pitch tool is helpful, and the services that the other services provide in terms of getting editorial coverage. But it's really down to how great the music is. There's more music being uploaded into all these services that may never be heard. Trying to find, a discovery of those songs is really difficult, even with the tools. It's about really understanding your own business, understanding who you are as an artist, understanding the playlist properties, understanding how to really communicate with a human. All those things are extremely helpful. When you're working with somebody that's doing pitching, may have particular skill sets that they're better at. They may have an understanding of really playlist well, or create great third-party playlists or relation to third-party playlisting. Some pitchers may or may not have editorial context. The idea of the pitch tool is to really alleviate give the ability for editors to really work on what it is they're supposed to work on instead of getting pitched all day long. Yeah. It's a valuable tool for, doing your job well. Influence and lists, it all comes down to the song. It all comes down to the data that song produces. And it really is incumbent on every artist to develop their own audience that's passionate about the music, and use the tools that are available. And in particular, Spotify's tools are just killer. Yeah. And the other DSPs have killer tools as well. I mean, they really do. And it's just finding the right ones. And it takes a little time. And it takes a frequency of release. I've really preached that while I was at Spotify, that the more often you're putting music into the ecosystem, you're having the ability to plant in places that songs or trees, in this sense, will grow, right? And it's about being, Johnny Appleseed, and then gardening, and it's a process.
Is there a kind of a best practice as far as how often people should be thinking about putting out new music?
Yeah, that varies between, and a lot of, I'm sorry for the vague answers. I mean, to say one thing and sort of like lockstep, that's it. Generally, a new artist should release a lot more often. Again, the new artist hasn't proven a particular song that they're associated with. And so the more often they can get people to come bite or come sit at the table of that meal and see what the variety of things are, the more often you can kind of build things. I like the idea of artists really, and this is something that I think you've done pretty well, and a lot of artists with producers and the A&R process within labels, is that at the outset of recording, you have to have multiple versions of every song, and as wide-ranging thematically, genre-wise as possible. And I mean, that really separates the artists from the artists, in a sense. I mean, if you're coming out and you have a song or a group of songs, you have an acoustic mix, you have a solo piano version of it, you have a remix of it, you have, an edit of it, vocal up, vocal down, dance mix, a cappella version, versions in different languages. If you're thinking about that at the front end, I would urge every artist that has the ability to speak in other languages to record every single song of theirs in all of the different languages that they know. It is a huge world out there. Songs resonate in English in other parts of the world, sure. But having the insight an opportunity to sing in native languages in those countries, and being able to understand that and do it effectively and authentically is a tremendous value to artists, as well as different versions musically of things.
And so
if somebody likes a song, why can't they have it in lots of different ways? And it helps create additional opportunities for discovery. And that's really what DSPs, in particular Spotify, is about: discovery. Pandora is too, and Amazon. Each one of the DSPs are doing a better job at being able to serve what you're into. And COVID right now, what we're experiencing right now, is a great example of that. If you take a look at all the rebranding that Apple has done geniusly with the whole stay at home sort of mindset, YouTube has done it as well. They're refacing all the playlist covers. They're all the concepts. It's all chill and relive your favorite records because you have time to really take deep dives into things. So I would imagine listening has gone up pretty well. Streaming has gone up okay, but everybody's going to get tired of their Netflix queue, right? It's kind of like, how many new series can you try and not like after the first episode that you spend an hour on? Whereas, you're going to listen to a song for 3 minutes, 4 minutes, and it's completely different value judgment, right? You do a lot more sampling.
If people are doing multiple versions, like you mentioned, is that something that they should put out kind of all at the same time, or do you recommend like kind of dripping them out over time, every couple weeks, every few weeks, put a new acoustic mix out or a piano mix comes out later? Is it better to kind of put them all out at the same time?
It really depends on the song, the artist's career, where they are, monthly listeners. I wouldn't recommend putting 25 different versions of that one thing out. It'd be interesting to see. Maybe you guys, maybe your audience is familiar with an artist named Tarawak, who put out a 15-song record, I think in July or late June of 2018, and they were 1-minute songs. And I guess I was smiling because I thought it was awesome, and she had videos for every single one of those songs too, and they told different stories, but they were 1-minute songs. And I thought, wow, we've really kind of gotten very creative, right? How often do you think those 1-minute songs were repeated and counted as a listen? The first 30 seconds, if you're listening for the first 30 seconds, it counts as a stream. So if you have more of an opportunity to have these 1-minute songs that are really interesting and people can loop them and play them over and over again, it's kind of a really interesting idea. So there's a lot of tactics and a lot of streaming strategies and ideas. They're all little battles within a larger sort of how do I differentiate? How do I stand out? How do I separate myself and really show my uniqueness as an artist? And that's a challenge. It's a challenge when there's so much stuff up. But there's a lot of terrible stuff up too. It's there's a lot of great things that are being exposed, and there's a lot of stuff that's, average. It's, again, people make judgment calls about music every time they hit play.
Yeah. That's so true. So let's talk to the independent artist out there who's kind of just getting started up. How can they best move forward, even if they don't have a playlist yet? What are some things that they can be doing to grow their streaming portfolio or catalog, so to speak?
Well, we talked about releasing more often, but before you're doing that, it's just to kind of really do a self-examination about who it is that you are as an artist and what your main idea is, if you do have a main idea. I kind of hope that artists have taken the time to really kind of assess, that the 10 questions of why I do what I do and where am I, and just having that actually almost a counseling session with another person to kind of throw that off. You can't, it's valuable to talk to other people that don't have an invested emotional relationship with you or friendship with you. to throw these things off of, because you need an ear and someone that's going to be able to kind of think objectively and kind of like, okay, well, that's a great lyric. The music's not so great here. Like, be able to have that idea going into battle. It's preparation for war. It's being able to kind of understand, do you have enough people at the front line? Do you have a strategy? What happens when they attack? It's all being able to plan out an effective communication and strategy. I'm in the midst of writing a blog post called Strategy Eats Culture for Breakfast. And I'm sort of examining that because I've always been told the opposite. Culture eats strategy for breakfast. You know why culture eats strategy for breakfast is that your strategy is crap. I mean, because strategy, like the gospel, so don't mean to get super on it, it doesn't change. It is laid out. It doesn't change no matter what happens. It is continuing on a plan going through. And so, not to oversimplify that, but it's important for artists at the front end to kind of have an understanding of who they are, what their message is, and to stay on message until it doesn't work, or until they discover in the process of life and making music and creating music that they change a little bit. Because no matter what, if you've been able to get an audience and you've been authentic about it, that audience should probably follow you wherever you go. And I think it's really important, to assess there are tools that you were asking about, like, what do you do here? What do you do here? And they're going to be different for every artist. And the frequency of release to me is like the main thing. And understanding the playlist ecosystem at every DSP. Understanding, is there a place for me straight up? Do I fit with these artists? And really listening to music objectively. I mean, it is so great. This is such a great time for artists who are fans of music. Because the more of music, the more they enjoy the idea of curating for others. This is a golden time for that, and will help you because the ecosystems of DSPs and streaming are native to this idea of sharing music in the form of a playlist. Here's this book. Our books, they are stories. One of the things that one of the taglines at Spotify was that we were part of the shows and editorial team, because every playlist is a show. It's kind of a set list, and within a set list, when you're an artist performing, you have a flow of how things go. So every playlist is kind of works off of that principle. There's a lot of ads out there. You'll see ads, for Spotify to come work for them. It's like, come join the band. Yeah, well, you're a band. You're joining a band, and these playlists are your set lists. And expose these with this little club that you go to. If it's Top Christian or whatnot, or Just Good Music playlist, that's a club that you're seeing, and that playlist is happening live right now all the time. And you go there, and all those people will go and engage with that playlist. So that's kind of the responsibility of others. I love that description. I don't know if they really use that anymore, but the shows and editorial is really about you were creating a show and a concept with each of those things.
I love that. So let's talk a little bit about, we've talked a lot about Spotify. Obviously now you're zoomed out a little bit. So maybe talk about Spotify versus some of the other platforms, Pandora, Amazon, Apple, and maybe even future casting. I know you talk about each of them are kind of defining and differentiating themselves, almost kind of like a radio format, I guess, where an artist really wants to kind of pick a lane and go after him. Can you talk a little bit about, just the other platforms, and, should artists be really focusing in on one of them, or should they be kind of going an all out assault and just sort of see what works?
Yeah. So, streaming is still kind of like, if we want to take a baseball metaphor, it's kind of in the bottom half of the third inning. It's really early in the game. And, you know, they all have subscriptions. Spotify has a free tier. The free tier is awesome. Spotify wants to make that free tier as great as it can be. Premium is awesome. Apple Music is awesome. Amazon's a great tool. Pandora's got the tiers, multi relationship with SiriusXM, Deezer, Tidal even, you know, and they all have subscriptions. So the question is like, how many people can afford each of those subscriptions, and do they really toggle back and forth? Me being an Apple user, right? I had our first, you know, iPod, and I mean, once I got out of like my MP3 phase after scraping things off of Napster and, you know, burning them to a disc and playing them, you know, an MP3 disc, and did a lot of that. Once I got, you know, the iPod, and I got locked into the Apple ecosystem, I wasn't interested in anything else. I tried once. I got one of these little Sony music clips. This is ancient history now, but it feels like yesterday. So there's like, it was the size of a pen. Hopefully you'll pull up a graphic. It was this Sony Vaio music clip. It was like, it had 40 megabytes. So you can basically put a playlist on it. And it was, you had to save your music to a proprietary Sony-based technology and play it from that. I mean, you're really talking about people with a lot of time and a real interest in music and music technology, which I was at that time. This is 99, 2000, right? And you had all these MP3 players and whatnot. And then as soon as the iPod came, I got locked into a particular technology. So really kind of lost touch with anything else other than Apple. And there's a lot of people of that generation that have moved from iTunes into Apple Music, and they're very comfortable with that. So in a sense, Apple's already differentiated themselves as a music platform with a particular sort of generation. It's not that they don't have younger users. It's just lived in sort of like this sort of changing of the guard in terms of music consumption. Pandora has too. Pandora was always thought of as a radio service. Even when I was doing radio promotion, we just used a really misunderstood Pandora from get-go, is that they were something other than just a bunch of radio stations that had no programmers and nobody you could talk to and pitch on music. So Pandora is great. Pandora is great for you can define your individual listening experience in a very passive way or active way at any particular time, and it's just flowing. You can hit thumbs up, and that algorithm really does well. And then it's also based on, you know, the music itself, because there's all musicologists that, you know, like will listen to stuff and decode it a particular way. Oh, if they like strings, oh, they're going to love this particular thing. So it's very thoughtful. That music genome is really powerful. So in a sense, all of the services have really sort of differentiated themselves, but they haven't differentiated themselves as the content that exists on each of them, right? So Spotify's drive towards podcasts, Apple's drive towards podcasts, Pandora with the stories, that's going to be big for them. Amazon with what they're doing. Amazon is going to come up with something pretty amazing to do themselves with that sort of physical experience, music experience, Prime experience. Can you imagine how many people have Prime right now that have never used the music service? They don't even know they have access to it. And the voice technology that's associated with it. So it's kind of like there's enough people in the world that can get and will continue to be able to get an Alexa or an Echo and listen passively. How that's not going to aggregate into large numbers is, and I'm jumping from DSP to DSP, but they really all have sort of, if you funnel down from that, each artist is probably better in particular areas with certain types of audience that like particular DSPs. And so I could see a differentiation, as you were talking about, where each of them sort of become their own genres, as in radio stations. You're going to go to Apple for this particular thing. You're going to go to Spotify because it's an open platform and you want to make your own playlist and you want to do a lot of discovery. And you're a little younger, or you like the podcasts, or you like the new series that they are. The content is the thing that is going to continue to be a challenge of differentiation between all of them. So it's really incumbent about the artist community, not just music, but podcasting and whatever comes with video. And that's where YouTube really, at the end of the day, is really poised to kind of be the Swiss Army knife of all of it, because they have all the ears and eyes and are slowly turning into it. But again, going back to that baseball metaphor, we're in the bottom of the third inning. It's an early game. Streaming is still very much in its infancy and it's reached the world, but it hasn't reached everybody. There are a lot of people on earth that listen to music, and it's just scratching the surface. So I know that's a pretty 60,000, 70,000 foot view of it. It's really, and there could be a disconnect between an artist that's an independent artist to kind of figure out, well, where do I fit in all that? Just feels like this amazing ocean that I'm just going to throw a rock into. But when you start from the big and you work backwards and you understand who you are as an artist and work forwards, somewhere in the middle, there's going to be a particular DSP that works really well for where your target audience is. And just being able to understand who you are and being able to put out music frequently is going to provide a lot of opportunity.
Yeah, I love that. Well, as we're kind of wrapping up the conversation, and you hinted on this a little bit, so I really want to dive deeper into this. Where are things going to go with streaming? We can talk about 24 months out, 12 months out, 6 months out, and really just giving us kind of a view from the future coming backwards. Because obviously, being inside Spotify, these companies are planning, much longer out. They're planning 12 months out, 24 months out. So how can an artist kind of take that view and set themselves up for success to win today?
There's a lot of information out there that leaks out. Some of it's true, some of it's not. Some of it is true to you, and you can utilize it. I think it's really important for artists to stay on top of digital music news services. There's one right there, Digital Music News, and Music Ally out of the UK, Music Business Worldwide. There's a few of them. Sometimes they repeat stories. Hypebot is great. I'm a voracious reader. I fire up the computer every morning and I just go through the stuff. And, again, I'm filtering things with a different, viewpoint. And I'm trying to think about my artist's reality of like what they need to pay attention to and what we need to work here. But if I had to pull back, one of the things that I wrote on a blog post that you can find on LinkedIn, and I'll send you guys a link to where I'm writing about this stuff every week. It's called Confessions of a Playlist Editor. And, they're just insights to where I kind of dealt with things, internally at Spotify that were helpful to learn about the mindset of understanding the DSP culture, as well as understand artist culture. And one of the things that I wrote about in there recently was how when Daniel Ek would talk to the team, it was always kind of like the future had already been built and we were just living out sort of almost like manifest destiny, predetermination of like whatever we're going to fill in. Like it had already been set. And 2 years ago, pretty much around 2 years ago, he said that the algorithm is going to get so great that it is going to know what it is that you want before you even know it. And concurrently with that, about 2 months later, on one of my other blog posts, I wrote a piece called The Algorithm is Going to Get You. So I was in London for team meetings and I saw this spray painted car park door and it had this figure on it. It said the algorithm is going to get you. And it was really kind of like, I sort of laughed, but it was also ominous. It was kind of like foreboding. And I'm thinking about how Daniel, when I saw that, I was thinking about Daniel, everything he used to say would come true about 6 months later. Like it was almost predicted. Well, duh, because the GSPs are planning out what the future is of their particular technology set. So you have little hints of this every week in what each of the DSPs do. Now, again, this is why artists need to have management or other people in their lives, or consultants or people that are really helpful in this area to not have to burden them with these things. But it's really important for them to understand all this stuff too.
Yeah,
because there are other artists that are native to it. So
yeah. That's so good. I love that answer. I think, be a student of what's happening, and as much as you can work with other people, like you said, consultants, managers, people that have their ear to the ground on the business side, so you can keep creating and doing what you're good at. As we're kind of wrapping up, we are going to do a deep dive for those who are interested. I want the scoop on distributors, DistroKid, AWOL, TuneCore. We are going to record that right after we jump off. And if people are interested in accessing that, they can go to madeitinmusic.com, our website, and access this deep dive along with all of the others. But to close out, how about we jump into our lightning round? Are you ready for that?
Sure.
Rapid fire questions. Here we go. Favorite artist success story you've been a part of?
Lauren Daigle at Spotify. Oh, more than that for King and Country. Torrin Wells, Phil Wickham, being able to see platinum and gold artists in utilizing where I really championed those artists inside of Spotify. Those are really gratifying. But prior to that, it would be Mercy Me with I Can Only Imagine crossover, Sixpence None the Richer, Kiss Me, Jars of Clay's Flood. And the first record that I ever worked was Nine Inch Nails' Pretty Hate Machine. So it's the first record that I ever got to work. I worked out at college. So I've had these little moments. I wish they were more often than every 4 years like the Olympics. But, occasionally there are things that break through. But excited about the last couple of years in terms of the new artists that have come out of streaming. And hopefully I was a little part of that story in terms of being able to provide newer and more often audiences to kind of make the jump into streaming that are new, especially in the Christian faith space.
Awesome. Second question. You were once based in New York City. What was your favorite venue to see shows?
My office, when I started, and I'm a native, so I used to go out a lot. Limelight was particularly crazy in the early 90s. CBGB's was down the street, a couple of blocks away from the offices that I had when I was with TBT. And I was on 4th and Lafayette, and I was over on Bowery. So CB's was always great. Arlene's Grocery in Lower East Side off of Ludlow. Strong club. Wetlands, which were in Soho. Great spot. I don't think it's there anymore. The Knitting Factory was a great venue for progressive music. And Rockwood. I mean, anytime I went back to New York, even in the past 5 years, it didn't matter what night it was. You go in Rockwood, and see some great music, and they always had music, and they had 3 venues going on at the same time. Tiny,
yeah,
but always good stuff. I like the smaller venues where I can really hear what's going on.
Awesome.
And, great starts.
What's one thing you're really excited to do after quarantine is over?
Wow. Get a real burger.
I love it. I'm with you there.
And then lastly,
a real burger and a real steak.
Yeah. Last lightning round question. What is the top false belief that artists have about Spotify?
That Spotify doesn't care about artists. that they don't care about the relationship. That's false.
Mm.
They care too much. Everything, every tool that exists, the whole reason why that company is in business is for serving the artist. I can tell you, I'm not going to be able to quote it specifically, although I do remember some of it. The sort of main point of Spotify was to give 1 million artists the ability to live off of their work to the enjoyment of billions of fans. I'm paraphrasing the main company line. And I remember sitting in our onboarding and seeing that graphic up, is that this is the mission statement of the company. I thought I'm a little older, seeing a mission statement that's that art's driven, for a company that has that sort of valuation, right? And real money dollars. I just was trying to get my head around this thing existing 20 years ago and how the world really has changed and how the arts are really essential to people's lives, especially right now. And how Spotify is probably, is really geared towards that. The other DSPs have them, but the other DSPs are a function of other commercial enterprises. Spotify lives and dies on the content that is on there. They're not selling hardware.
Yeah. I love it. Well, that is a great answer and a great way to wrap up this interview. John Butler, if people want to connect with you, work with you, learn from you, read your blogs, where can they find you?
You can find me on LinkedIn. I normally will blog there and should be able to reach out to me.
So good. Well, as I mentioned, we are going to do our deep dive right after this interview is over. If people want access to that, they can get that at madeitinmusic.com, where you can access this deep dive. We're going to talk about digital distributors. And yeah, John, thanks so much for being on the Made It Music podcast.
Thanks for having me, guys. Appreciate it.
What's up? Thank you for watching the Made It Music podcast season 3. If you want to check out any of the other episodes from season 3, click up here. And we talk in the show about these really cool deep dives with all this extra bonus content. And if you want access to all of those, click here.